2 Kings chapter 17, verse 1. Hoshea son of Elah began to rule over Israel in the 12th year of King Ahaz's reign in Judah. He reigned in Samaria 9 years. Verse 2. He did what was evil in the Lord's sight, but not to the same extent as the kings of Israel who ruled before him. Verse 3. King Shalmaneser of Assyria attacked King Hoshea, so Hoshea was forced to pay heavy tribute to Assyria. Verse 4. But Hoshea stopped paying the annual tribute and conspired against the king of Assyria by asking King So of Egypt to help him shake free of Assyria's power. When the king of Assyria discovered this treachery, he seized Hoshea and put him in prison. Verse 5. Then the king of Assyria invaded the entire land, and for 3 years he besieged the city of Samaria. Verse 6. Finally, in the 9th year of King Hoshea's reign, Samaria fell, and the people of Israel were exiled to Assyria. They were settled in colonies of Hala, along the banks of the Harbor River in Gojan, and in the cities of Medes. Verse 7. This disaster came upon the people of Israel because they worshipped other gods. They sinned against the Lord their God, who had brought them safely out of Egypt and had rescued them from the power of Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. Verse 8. They had followed the practices of the pagan nations the Lord had driven from the land ahead of them, as well as the practices the kings of Israel had introduced. Verse 9. The people of Israel had also secretly done many things that were not pleasing to the Lord their God. They built pagan shrines for themselves in all their towns, from the smallest outpost to the largest walled city. Verse 10. They set up sacred pillars and Asherah poles at the top of every hill and under every green tree. Verse 11. They offered sacrifices on all the hilltops, just like the nations the Lord had driven from the land ahead of them. So the people of Israel had done many evil things, arousing the Lord's anger. Verse 12. Yes, they worshipped idols, despite the Lord's specific and repeated warnings. Verse 13. Again and again, the Lord has sent his prophets and seers to warn both Israel and Judah. Turn from all your evil ways, obey my commands and decrees, the entire law that I commanded your ancestors to obey, and that I gave you through my servants and prophets. Verse 14. But the Israelites would not listen. They were as stubborn as their ancestors, who had refused to believe in the Lord their God. Verse 15. They rejected his decrees and the covenant he had made with their ancestors, and they despised all his warnings. They worshipped worthless idols, so they became worthless themselves. They followed the example of the nations around them, disobeying the Lord's command not to imitate them. Verse 16. They rejected all the commands of the Lord their God and made 2 calves from metal. They set up an Asherah post and worshipped Baal and all the forces of heaven. Verse 17. They even sacrificed their own sons and daughters in the fire. They consulted fortune tellers and practiced sorcery and sold themselves to evil, arousing the Lord's anger. Verse 18. Because the Lord was very angry with Israel, he swept them away from his presence. Only the tribe of Judah remained in the land. Verse 19. But even the people of Judah refused to obey the commands of the Lord their God, for they followed the evil practices that Israel had introduced. Verse 20. The Lord rejected all the descendants of Israel. He punished them by handing them over to their attackers until he had banished Israel from his presence. Verse 21. For when the Lord tore Israel away from the kingdom of David, they chose Jeroboam, son of Nebat, as their king. But Jeroboam drew Israel away from following the Lord and made them commit a great sin. Verse 22. And the people of Israel persisted in all the evil ways of Jeroboam. They did not turn from these sins. Verse 23. Until the Lord finally swept them away from his presence, just as all his prophets had warned. So Israel was exiled from their land to Assyria. where they remained to this day. Verse 24. The king of Assyria transported groups of people from Babylon, Kotha, Ava, Hamath, and Siphaven, and resettled them in the towns of Samaria, replacing the people of Israel. They took possession of Samaria and lived in 8 towns. Verse 25. But since these foreign settlers did not worship the Lord when they first arrived, the Lord sent lions among them, which killed some of them. Verse 26. So a message was sent to the king of Assyria: the people you have sent to live in the towns of Samaria do not know the religious customs of the God of the land. He has sent lions among them to destroy them because they have not worshipped him correctly. Verse 27. The king of Assyria then commanded, send one of the exiled priests back to Samaria. Let him live there and teach the new resident the religious customs of the God of the land. Verse 28. So one of the priests who had been exiled from Samaria returned to Bethel and taught the new residents how to worship the Lord. Verse 29. But these various groups of foreigners also continued to worship their own gods. In town after town where they lived, they placed their idols at the pagan shrines that the people of Samaria had built. Verse 30. Those from Babylon worshipped idols of their gods Succoth-Benoth. Those from Kotha worshipped their gods Negal, and those from Hamath worshipped Ashima. Verse 31. The Avite worshipped their gods Nephaz and Tak, and the people of Sepharvaim even burned their own children and sacrifices to their gods Adramelech and Anamelech. Verse 32. These new residents worshipped the Lord, but they also appointed from among themselves all sorts of people as priests to offer sacrifices at their place of worship. Verse 33. And though they worshipped the Lord, they continued to follow their own gods according to the religious custom of the nations from which they came. Verse 34. And this is still going on today. They continue to follow their former practices instead of truly worshiping the Lord and obeying the decrees, regulations, and instructions and command he gave the descendants of Jacob, whose name he changed to Israel. Verse 35. For the Lord had made a covenant with the descendants of Jacob and commanded them, do not worship any other gods, or bow before them, or serve them, or offer sacrifices to them. Verse 36. But worship only the Lord, who brought you out of Egypt with great strength and a powerful arm. Bow down to him alone and offer sacrifices only to him. Verse 37. Be careful at all times to obey the decrees, regulations, instructions, and commands that he wrote for you. You must not worship other gods. Verse 38. Do not forget the covenant I made with you, and do not worship other gods. Verse 39. You must worship only the Lord your God. He is the one who will rescue you from all your enemies. Verse 40. But the people would not listen and continued to follow their former practices. Verse 41. So while these new residents worshipped the Lord, they also worshipped their idols. And to this day, their descendants do the same. Amen.